Hey there, here's a video to do an overview of a new feature in Brewers Toolbelt 1.1, which is recipes, so the ability to build complete recipes in the Brewers Toolbelt app. So I'll just run through all the various different features here. So just click on recipes. You can store however many recipes you want. You can create a new one and it'll just file it as a undefined category, and then you can add the category. So I'll just call this British Golden 1. And you'll see here, I'll place it under undefined, then I can go into the recipe, and there's all the various different sections here you can build out. I'll come back to overview because there's not much here till I start to build out the recipe. So in main, I'm going to put in basic information about myself, put in today's date. You have to pick the style guide before you can pick the style, so there's a bunch of different style guides supported. We'll start with the current BJCP style guide, and then from there I'll pick British Golden Ale, hopefully. There we go. Set the efficiency for my system. So this is the this is mash efficiency. So how much of the sugars in the grains in the mash, and I only take grains into consideration. So what percentage of the grains in the mash actually get converted to sugar. So this is not an overall brew house type of efficiency or anything like that. It's strictly mash efficiency. And then attenuation. So typical what percentage of the sugar gets fermented out by whatever yeast you're using. Okay. Then for the mash, these label fields here are automatically calculated, so you just have to fill in the text fields. Any of these, so this is your mash thickness. Any of these, once you're set, you can just toggle back and forth between standard and metric, and it'll automatically calculate those for you. The dead space, this is really more for brew in a bag type brewers. If you're batch or fly sparge, you can still put in the dead space here, but this is really if you have a large dead space. So let's say you have 2 gallons of dead space. This is to make sure that's taken into account with your thickness. So if I have a 10 gallon mash and 2 gallons of that are dead space, then that could really throw the thickness of the actual mash off. So this takes that into account, and if you want, you can just set it to 0. I'm a brew in a bag brewer, and I actually have a good amount of dead space under the basket where my brew in a bag goes in. So and then I'll go ahead and just set my mash temperature. Okay, and you can see as you go along, I haven't put any grains in yet, so there's no grain weight. But it'll start adding it in as I configure it. So for my boil, final volume is not your fermenter volume, but at the end of the boil, how much wort do you have in your boil kettle? Right. So I may have 6 gallon carboy that I want to put 5 gallons of wort into, but I actually finish the boil at, in my case, I usually end around 7.5 gallons, so I can get about 6 gallons of really clean wort into my fermenter. So this is, again, the final volume of wort at the end of your boil that you want to target. So here I'm going to target 7.5 gallons, boil for 60 minutes. My setup, I boil off at about 1.25 gallons per hour, right? So you can see here it does a reverse math to figure out what my at the start of the boil, what I want to have wort wise. Now I throw in my fermentables. So the search bar in fermentables will search for name as well as maltster. So let's say I want to add in Maris Otter. So I'll just pick Chris Maris Otter, and maybe I want 6 pounds, and I'm okay. If I can change out, because this will change the calculations since I don't mash sugar, that'll change things, so that'll be taken into account. So I want to make sure I set, if it's a sugar versus an extract versus whatever, that I set this type properly, and also yield and colors here. So, and once you have this in here, you can change the name to whatever you want. It doesn't affect the ingredient database. This is just going to affect the fermentable in your recipe. So if you change it here, it's not going to change it in any of your other recipes. Maybe I'll add in another, so this time I'll search on the maltsters. Maybe I want some raw 2-row. Maybe do another 6 pounds of that. And you'll see here it'll throw it under grain. If I were to change this to sugar, it'll throw it into a different section here, so I can keep things straight quickly. So yep, and you can also see here it'll calculate on the fly. This is my current OG from these fermentables, so it's 1048 OG, and I can see from the style that I picked, this is the range for the style. So I'm in range, and then my color is 3.8. When the style that I set is 2 to 6, so I'm also in range. I can also flip between weight and percent. So here I can see I'm 50% for those two, and it'll automatically adjust these on the fly as I add more grain. It'll give me the total percentage. That's also based on weight. Okay, now if I go back and after putting in the fermentables and I look at the mash, now I'll see that it sees 12 pounds of grain. It also is based on the thickness, dead space, and this weight is going to calculate the amount of strike water and mash volume. So strike water, obviously I have two quarts per pound. 12 pounds is 6 gallons, but then I also have two gallons of dead space that's going to add in. So that's where it's taking that dead space into account. And then this mash volume is taking in a certain percentage of volume of per pound of grain. So it's going to say if I'm adding in 12 pounds of grain, that's going to add just under a gallon of volume on top of the strike water. So I take 12 pounds of grain, add in 8 gallons of strike water, I'm going to end up with just shy of 9 gallons in my mash tun. Then if I go look at the boil, it'll say, okay, based on grain absorption, standard grain absorption numbers. So there might be some variance from this number from reality because different grains will absorb a little differently, but it should be a good ballpark. It'll say if I start with 8.96 gallons in my mash, when I run that off, if I were to just run that off into my kettle, then I'm gonna end up with just under 7 gallons of wort in the kettle, right? So if I'm doing brew in a bag, this would be my starting volume at the start of the boil. I can see here I'm almost 2 gallons short on where I want to be at the start of the boil. So I may then go back and adjust my mash thickness, or I may just plan on adding in that much water to get me back to where I want to be. And that's what all the calculations are based off of, this 8.75 gallons. So adding in this water, getting you to the 8.75 gallons is going to get you to the gravity numbers that are calculated. If I'm doing batch sparge or I'm doing fly sparge, then I would know I'm going to need about this much. The delta between these two is about how much sparge water I'm going to need. So if I'm doing a batch sparge, most likely I'm not going to be doing that thick of a mash. Maybe I'll do something more like 1.5 quarts per pound, in which case you'll see here I'm probably going to need somewhere around roughly 3.5 gallons of water for my second batch of sparge. Or if I fly sparge, I'll probably end up running around 3.5 gallons of sparge water through the mash to end up with my target volume. Okay, so I have my fermentables set. Now I'll add in some hops. I'll just add in one hop here. This will search for hop name only. So let's just say I want to do Willamette. And then I can go ahead and set, let's just say I'll do 2 ounces of Willamette, and for 60 minutes of the boil. And you can see here it automatically calculates the IBUs. I can also flip over to see for this particular hop what was the IBU contribution or its weight. And then maybe I also want to add in some in the whirlpool. And this whirlpool's the IBU extraction is modified based on how it's used. So dry hop, for example, won't add IBUs. Whirlpool, I assume that you get half the IBUs that you would in the boil. It's a fairly common assumption. So I'll just set this to whirlpool, and so you can see here it's slotted in aroma whirlpool, and I got less IBUs than I did for the 60-minute amount. And also maybe I'll add some and change it up and throw some Challenger in the dry hop. And you'll see here it flips it over to days for the dry hop, since you don't dry hop for minutes. Let's just say 2 weeks, and I'll do 2 ounces there. And here you'll see it contributes no IBUs, so it breaks it out in the different sections there. And again, I can see here where I'm at IBU wise against my style that I picked. You can add as many yeasts in as you want. And again, this searches based on name, the laboratory, so Wyeast versus White Labs versus the Yeast Bay, or whichever. And then also the product ID, which would be like WLP001 or WY1056, things like that. So let's say I want to use English Ale from White Labs. I know that's 002, so I'll just type that in, go ahead and pick that. The form is whether it's liquid, dry, or slurry. And really this is going to affect the units. So for example, liquid, it would be a vial or a smack pack, whereas slurry, it would be a certain number of milliliters. Let's say I'm repitching or I'm doing a starter and I want to have 2.5 liter starter going in. And again, I could add others. So if I wanted to add in, Brett into secondary or something like that, I can continue to add yeast and bugs. And then miscellaneous, so this would be, for example, if I want to add in Whirlflock, something like that. So I'll just add in, and the unit here is just on the fly, so this is free form, since miscellaneous can kind of be anything. And then maybe I'll put that in for 15 minutes, and then I can say where in am I going to do it in the boil or the mash, or where am I going to put in this. One tablet, and then also let's put in some yeast nutrient. And again, that search will just work on the name for in miscellaneous. So the search is different based on what kind of information that we have. So let's just say I'll say 1, and for example here I might do, for yeast nutrient, I might do a teaspoon. And I'll put this in for 10 minutes in the boil. Okay, so now I have all my miscellaneous. I also have a freeform notes section here, and that you can put notes in. And now my recipe is complete, and I can see an overview now. It's going to be populated so I can get a general view of against the style that I picked, my OG, FG, color, ABV, and IBU, and how that lines up against what I picked. And yeah, you can go in here and see that it is going to retain, and as you go back and forth, this is saved in a permanent store on the phone, so as you go to other apps and come back, all this will be saved. So if I go to this recipe and then I go back to the one that I was working on, everything's still there. Great, well I hope that was useful, and I hope you enjoy using the new recipe tool in Brewer's Tool Belt. Thanks for watching.